Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about the future of Skyrim mods, specifically about paid mods, and why I really don't think you should worry about it too much. And this has to do with two things potentially unfolding in this timeline. One, resistance from a psychological and financial perspective, the 80-20% rule. And two, opportunity opening up for new modders. But before we get into that, we have to talk about the background of what's going on. Skyrim mods are gradually going from free to paid as a side effect of the Verify Creator program, which is the evolution of the Creation Club. As more mod authors migrate their free mods from, let's say, Nexus to this program, there's going to be less free mods available for players. The reality is that there is much temptation for mod authors in going down this path to make money, which is understandable, which we'll talk about later. Take a look at the Bethesda website. Here where it says, what kind of creations can I sell? In one of the bullet point, one thing that stands out to me is this. It says, your previously released free content may be repurposed for creations released through the Verify Creator program. And the Verify Creator program is actually not that overly difficult to get in because it says here modding experience is useful but definitely not required. So they're not asking for somebody with extensive kind of professional kind of work to be applied. It's basically if you can create a mod and you have some decent mod, you can get in. Let's go back to what I mentioned before about resistance from a psychological and financial perspective and the 80-20% rule. This is what I find interesting to watch the nature of humans unfold, and this is why I still see that there's a good path going forward for the future of modding, and I'm not afraid and neither should you. If you take a look at some of the top mods on Nexus, with this new program, some of those mods will be leaving. I'm not going to name any names, but the temptation to leave because of money on a different platform is actually quite high. Why stay and take some tiny little donation money from being on Nexus when they can move to, let's say, the Verify Creator program and make much more money from that? And quite a bit of these mods that are leaving are going to be the core foundation that hundreds of other mods depend on. But here's where the situation in this timeline kind of breaks down. So even if they move to being paid mods, it's going to be still quite difficult to make cash, especially because many of the player base in Skyrim are not ultra filthy rich. And yes, it is true that some people do have money and they do like to spend it, but that's not the majority. But consider the 80-20% rule, also known as the Pareto principle, or some say Pareto principle. And it states that 80% of consequences come from 20% of causes. So for example, in a fundraising event, 20% of donors contribute towards 80% of the total. This kind of principle applies to many parts of life, and Skyrim modding is no exception. Loosely speaking, in Skyrim paid mod situation, most likely it'll be 20% of the player base buying 80% of the paid mods, or maybe 20% stay and pay, while 80% resist paying. They forget about Skyrim, they leave, and they move on to another game. But with Skyrim being a really old game with a relatively small player base, the profit is still simply not sustainable. If we take a look at the player base on the Skyrim Steam charts, 30-day average, we hover around maybe 20,000 players on a good day. It used to average around 16k. And of course, keep in mind that's only Steam and not other sources like GOG. And if paid mods become the norm, where the majority of players just cannot afford those mods, what do you think is going to happen to the player base? It's going to drop like a sack of potatoes that's too heavy to hold on to. What happens when the player base drops? The game dies, because this community is largely built on the players and the modders and the people. Overall, this leads to a more decline in player interest. Then small to medium-sized YouTube content creators see that they have a much smaller number of audience, and their video views begin to drop. So that brings a question. Do you really think they're going to be paying hundreds of thousands of dollars out of their own pocket to buy mods to showcase to their already dwindling number of viewers? No, they're probably most likely going to stop making videos. This leads to less mods being showcased, leading to mod creators having to stop making and maintaining mods because of low number of downloads. So eventually, players will leave the modding community, not because they want to, but because they have to. Players love Skyrim, but their wallets just simply don't. Supply and demand will dictate the path forward, and I really don't see demand surpassing supply in this situation? Just simply due to financial situation, as most people are not filthy rich. Starfield is a good example of seeing the unfolding of supply and demand in action. When Starfield was just released, there was a huge player base. Mods were being released so quickly, and then it died down. As players stopped playing Starfield, the modders had no choice but to stop making mods because they saw the low demand. And also because they weren't having fun either. So when there's low demand, of course, it isn't worth the time investment. And this applies to anyone who creates something. And I expect that we're going to see the same issue unfold in the paid mods situation, where there isn't enough demand for paid mods, and it slowly fades away, and we revert back to the way things are with free mods, basically our current situation. This leads to a second point I want to make about why I'm not too worried about paid mods being the norm, and that is the opportunity opening up for new modders. This is an unlikely scenario because it still largely depends on how many players are left modding Skyrim. So let's consider this timeline where it turns into a direction where a few handle the big popular mods to leave Nexus and become paid mods. Now this leaves an opportunity door for those who want to create mods because they love to, but they always been kind of hesitant to make mods because the mods that they want have already been created and it's already have like millions of views, millions of downloads. So they can't compete with that. But the moment those kind of large mods leave, now it's the opportunity for some of those modders to go ahead and kind of recreate maybe potentially a better version of that mod and upload it again for free on Nexus, and the cycle kind of rinse and repeat. So let's talk about modders being paid. And of course, I believe that modders should be paid for the hard work because it takes so much perseverance and grit and dedication and skill and talent just to create some of those incredible mods that we use every day. But this situation leaves us in a very difficult dilemma because the majority of the players do not want to pay for mods, or they don't have the finances to pay for it. So my question to you is, what would you do different? I mean, is there any way to make it so that Bethesda makes money because they need to pay their employees, that modders make money because they also need to pay their bills, and that players are happy because they don't have to spend a ton of money on a very, very old game? If I'm being honest, I am slightly exhausted about this whole situation because it's been going on. The paid mod situation has been here for quite a while, for years now, and but it's gotten very serious as of late. So I'm curious to know your thoughts. What are you guys feeling here? Because right now I am emotionally kind of torn because on the one hand, of course, I believe modders should be paid for their hard work, but that's the two. They have to pay their employees. The community just isn't a filthy rich community. And to have to pay like hundreds of dollars for mods for a game that's really, really old, that originally started because of the passion that the player base has, is now evolving into a situation where it's like just money is the root now. It's a tough situation. To kind of sum up, I think it's highly unlikely that paid mods will become the norm of Skyrim modding. Rather, it'll be relegated to a very niche portion of the market. The majority of the mods will still be free. Or, players just get tired of the drama and just leave Skyrim for another game, which there are many games, but none of them just has the heart and soul of Skyrim.